The champagne flute slipped from Adrian Whitmore's fingers, hitting the marble floor with a crystal crack that nobody heard over the orchestra. Because across the gilded ballroom, walking through the crowd like she owned the air itself, was Simone Laurent, and she wasn't supposed to exist in his world anymore. Adrian? His new wife, Charlotte, touched his arm, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said, though his throat had gone dry. "Just someone I used to know." But Simone wasn't looking at him. Her eyes, dark and focused, tracked someone moving through the society crowd. And when Adrian followed her gaze, his blood turned to ice. Nikolai Volkov, the man whose name people whispered in private clubs and boardrooms. Nay, the Russian who'd turned legitimate business into an art form while everyone pretended not to know where his empire had really started. A man who could make problems disappear with a phone call and fortunes appear with a handshake. Adrian watched, frozen, as Nikolai crossed the entire Gala. Past senators whose campaigns he'd funded, past old money families who owed him favors, past everyone who mattered in this city, and stopped in front of Simone like she was the only person in the room. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs, because he knew, with the sick certainty of a man watching his past and present collide, that whatever happened next would destroy everything. 3 years ago, everything had been different. Back then, Simone had been his secret weapon. The art authenticator who could read a painting the way other people read books. She had an eye that saw through forgeries like they were made of glass, a gift that had made Adrian's gallery the most trusted in the city. "This Caravaggio," she'd said one night, her finger tracing the canvas without touching it, hovering millimeters above the surface like she could feel the artist's hand beneath the centuries of varnish. "It's real." Adrian had looked up from the provenance documents scattered across his desk. The gallery was quiet at this hour, just past midnight, the kind of silence that made every word feel important. "You're sure?" "The brushwork doesn't lie." Simone stepped back, tilting her head to catch the light differently. Her natural curls were pulled back with a silk scarf. And then she wore the oversized sweater she always put on when she was deep in analysis. "See how the light falls on the fabric here? That's not technique you can fake. That's genius you're born with." She moved closer again, her eyes tracking details invisible to anyone else. The craquelure pattern is consistent with early 17th century. The pigment composition matches Caravaggio's known palette: lead white, vermilion, earth tones. Even the canvas weave is right. Adrian crossed the room to stand beside her, close enough to smell her perfume mixed with the faint scent of linseed oil that always clung to the gallery air. "So we have a genuine Caravaggio. We have a genuine problem." Simone turned to face him, and something in her expression made his stomach tighten. "The painting is real, but the provenance documentation is fabricated." "How can you tell?" "Because I know who actually owns it." She picked up the papers from his desk, her fingers running down the listed chain of custody. "This says the piece was in a private Italian collection from 1952 to 1989, then sold to a German industrialist, then to an American collector in 2008. But I've seen this painting before, Adrian, 2 years ago at an authentication seminar in Moscow." "Moscow?" "It was being used as an example of recovered art." Her voice dropped lower. "It belongs to the Kozlov family, or it did, before it disappeared from a private transport 3 months ago." The name hit Adrian like cold water. Everyone in the art world knew the Kozlov name, even if they pretended not to. Old money with new methods. Collectors whose acquisitions didn't always come through legal channels. "If we sell this," Simone continued, her eyes locked on his, "we're not just dealing in art anymore, Adrian. We're laundering something much darker. This painting is dirty money in a gilt frame." Adrian stared at the Caravaggio, the death of St. Matthew, rendered in Caravaggio's signature dramatic shadows and divine light. Beautiful, Priceless. Poisonous. Then we don't sell it, he said, turning back to her. We send it back. Simone's shoulders relaxed slightly. You're sure? The commission on something like this would cost us everything that matters. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The gallery's reputation. Our reputation. I'm not risking that. She smiled then, the kind of smile that made the late nights and mounting debts worth it. We're a team. That's what makes this work. We're more than a team. Adrian pulled her closer, kissed her forehead, then her lips. She tasted like the coffee they'd been drinking all evening and something sweeter. Trust, maybe, or hope. I'll contact the consignor in the morning, he said. Tell them we can't authenticate the provenance. They'll have to take it back. They won't be happy. Let them be unhappy somewhere else. Adrian pulled her toward the door, switching off the gallery lights one by one. Come on, we've been here for 12 hours. Let's go home. Simone took one last look at the Caravaggio, still illuminated by the single spotlight they'd left on. It really is beautiful, she said softly. So are you. Adrian wrapped his arm around her waist. And unlike that painting, you're exactly what you appear to be. She laughed and leaned into him as they walked out into the cool night air. Neither of them looked back at the painting. Neither of them knew it would destroy everything. 6 weeks later, Adrian sat alone in his office at 2 a.m, staring at numbers that refused to add up. The gallery was drowning. Rent, 3 months overdue. The landlord had stopped accepting promises. Insurance lapsed 2 weeks ago, leaving $1 million in art sitting vulnerable. Payroll. He'd let go of 2 staff members already, and the remaining 3 were working on deferred payment. The line of credit he'd opened last year was maxed out, bleeding interest at 18%. And then there were the personal debts. The loan from Charlotte's father that had seemed like salvation 6 months ago now felt like a noose. $50,000 at family rates, with the unspoken understanding that failure to repay meant losing more than money. Adrian had met Charlotte at a fundraiser 3 months after the Caravaggio went back. She was young, connected, from a family whose name opened doors his never could. Dating her had been strategic at first. Access to her father's network, to collectors who bought on reputation rather than price. But strategy had become complicated. She was talking about moving in together, about meeting his family, about futures that required a solvent present. His phone buzzed, a text from Simone in Paris. Conference is incredible. You should see the Rothko they brought in. Missing you. Home Thursday. And Adrian set the phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes. Thursday. 3 days away. The call had come that afternoon. A voice he didn't recognize, speaking English with an accent he couldn't place. Mr. Whitmore, we understand you recently acquired a Caravaggio. We returned it, Adrian had said immediately. The provenance was questionable. Yes, we know. A pause. We are the original consignors, and we'd like to discuss reacquisition at a substantially higher commission. I told you the provenance can be corrected. We have access to documentation that will satisfy any inquiry. Clean papers, Mr. Whitmore, authenticated by experts your clients will trust. I'm not interested. $3 million. The voice had remained perfectly calm. Your commission would be $600,000, enough to solve your current financial difficulties. Adrian's throat had gone dry. How do you know about? We make it our business to know. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, we'll find another gallery, and you'll find that your creditors become significantly less patient. The line had gone dead. Now, sitting in the gallery with Simone's text glowing on his phone, Adrian walked out into the main exhibition space. The Caravaggio hung where they'd left it 6 weeks ago, still waiting for return transport that the consignor had mysteriously delayed. It hung there like a question he didn't want to answer. $3 million. He could pay off everything. The rent, the insurance, the loans. He could breathe again. The gallery could survive. His relationship with Charlotte's family could survive. But Simone, she'd know. And the moment she saw the authentication papers, she'd know what he'd done. Unless he didn't tell her. The thought arrived fully formed, seductive in its simplicity. She was in Paris for another 3 days. The sale could happen before she returned. By the time she found out, if she found out, it would be done. The money would be in the account. The gallery would be saved. She'd be angry, yes. But she'd understand. Eventually. She knew how desperate things had become. She'd forgive him. "We're a team," she'd said. "That's what makes this work." Adrian pulled out his phone and opened his email. The consignor had sent authentication templates, provenance documents that looked perfect to anyone who didn't know they were fabricated. All they needed was Simone's signature. His hands were shaking as he opened the document files on her laptop, the one she'd left at the gallery, the one with all her authentication records, her digital signature, her professional seal. It would be so easy. He told himself he'd think about it, sleep on it, make a rational decision in the morning. But at 3:47 a.m., with creditors' emails piling up in his inbox and Charlotte's father's disappointed voice echoing in his memory, Adrian Whitmore made his choice. He opened Simone's signature file. His hands moved across the keyboard with a speed that felt disconnected from his body, like someone else was doing this, someone desperate and reckless he didn't recognize. Authentication documents filled out, provenance verified. Her name appearing where it needed to appear, in the places that would make everything legal, everything clean. When he was finished, he sat back and stared at what he'd created. Perfect forgeries, just like the provenance documents themselves. The call came at 4:15 a.m. "Mr. Whitmore, have you reached a decision?" Adrian's voice sounded hollow in his own ears. "Yes. And? Send the buyer." The transaction happened at dawn. A man in an expensive suit arrived in a car with tinted windows. He examined the painting for less than 5 minutes, glanced at the authentication documents without really reading them, and transferred $3 million to an account number Adrian provided. He didn't give his name. His money smelled like blood and gun oil and things Adrian didn't want to know about. When the car pulled away with the Caravaggio wrapped in protective cloth, Adrian stood in the empty gallery and felt nothing at first. Then relief. Sweet. A shameful relief. Then, slowly, like ice water in his veins, the dread began. Simone came home on a Thursday evening with stories about Paris and a monograph on Renaissance restoration techniques she'd picked up at a bookshop near the Louvre. She found Adrian in the gallery, reorganizing the storage room like a man trying to outrun his thoughts. "Hey!" She kissed his cheek, and he tasted his own guilt in the gesture. "You're here late. Everything okay?" "Fine. Great, actually." The lie came easier than it should have. "How was the conference?" "Incredible. I have so much to tell you." She set down her bag, already moving toward the office. "Let me just check what came in while I was gone, then we can grab dinner and—" "Simone, wait." But she was already at the computer. "I already pulling up the gallery records with the efficiency of someone who knew the system inside out because she'd helped build it." Adrian watched her face change. The smile faded first. Then her posture shifted, shoulders going rigid. She scrolled slowly, deliberately, through the transaction log, the sale date, the amount, the authentication documents attached. When she finally turned to look at him, her expression was perfectly blank. "Where's the Caravaggio?" Adrian's mouth went dry. "I can explain. Where is the Caravaggio? I sold it." The words felt like stones. "The buyer came back with clean provenance. The money was— Simone, the gallery was drowning. We were 3 months behind on rent. The insurance had lapsed. I had creditors threatening legal action. You sold it." Her voice was eerily calm, which was somehow worse than if she'd shouted. "The painting we agreed was too dangerous to touch. The painting tied to criminal networks. You sold it. They had documentation. Real documentation. It was legitimate. Show me." Adrian pulled up the files with shaking hands. Simone scanned them in silence, her face unreadable. When she reached the authentication section, she went very still. "This is my signature. Simone, this is my signature." She looked up at him, and there was something terrible in her eyes. "On documents I never saw. For a sale I never approved. You forged my authentication. I needed you to validate it. The buyer wouldn't. You used my name." Simone stood, and Adrian took an involuntary step back. "My reputation, my professional credentials. You put my signature on documentation for a painting we both knew was dirty." "The provenance was clean. They fixed it." "There is no fixing it, Adrian." The calm cracked just for a moment, before she pulled it back like armor. "That painting is tied to the Kozlov family. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any idea what you've done? I saved the gallery. You threw me under." Her voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "When authorities trace that painting, and they will trace it, Adrian, because the Kozlovs don't deal in art, they deal in money laundering and arms trafficking and things that get people killed. When they trace it, whose name is on the authentication?" Adrian's stomach dropped. "They said it was clean. They lied." Simone's laugh was bitter and broken. "Of course they lied. And you were so desperate for the money that you didn't care. My name is on that paperwork, my signature, my professional seal. When this blows up, I'm the one who will be investigated. I'm the one who authenticated a painting used to move dirty money. I'll tell them it wasn't you. Your word against forensic documentation?" She shook her head. "I'm the art expert, Adrian. I'm the one whose signature validates the sale. In the eyes of the law, I'm either complicit or catastrophically negligent. Either way, my career is over." The reality of it hit him like a physical blow. "Simone, I didn't think—" "No, you didn't." She turned away from him, staring at the empty wall where the Caravaggio had hung. "You thought about the money, about saving yourself, about your gallery, your debts, your problems. Our problems don't." The word was quiet but absolute. "Don't you dare make this about us. You made this choice alone. You forged my signature alone. You sold my credibility to save your business." Adrian reached for her, but she stepped back like his touch was poison. "How much?" she asked. "What? How much did they pay you to destroy my life?" $3 million. Your commission would have been— "I don't want money from this." Simone's voice was hollow. "I want you to understand what you've done. That painting is evidence now, Adrian. Evidence in crimes I'll be tied to because you put my name on the paperwork." She walked to the desk, pulled her laptop bag over her shoulder, gathered her authentication tools with methodical precision. "Where are you going?" "Away from you." She moved toward the door, then stopped, and turned back to face him one last time in the gallery where they'd worked side by side, where they'd examined the Caravaggio together, where he'd promised her they'd send it back. "You'll regret this, Adrian," she said quietly. "Not because I'll hurt you. I won't have to. Because you'll do it to yourself. You always do." "Simone, please. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice." She looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been grief. "I just hope it was worth it." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Adrian stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by art he could barely afford to keep, with $3 million in his account and the growing certainty that he'd just sold the only thing that really mattered. The silence felt like drowning. Simone sat in the law office of Patricia Chen 3 days after she walked out of the gallery. She'd spent those 3 days documenting everything. Every email about the Caravaggio, every authentication record she'd ever created, every conversation about the painting's provenance. She'd backed up files, created encrypted copies, and built a digital paper trail that proved exactly what Adrian had done and when. Now she sat across from one of the city's best divorce attorneys, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes dry despite the wreckage of her life. "I won't lie to you, Ms. Laurent," Patricia said, reviewing the preliminary documents. "You won't get much. The gallery is underwater financially. Your authentication rights are classified as corporate work product, not personal intellectual property. See, and the Caravaggio sale, while ethically questionable, was technically a gallery transaction." "I understand. We can fight for a percentage of the gallery's value, but given the current debt load, that might actually be a liability rather than an asset." Patricia looked up, her expression sympathetic. "I know this isn't what you want to hear. What about future value?" Patricia paused. "I'm sorry?" "The gallery is worth nothing now, but Adrian won't let it stay that way." Simone leaned forward slightly. "He's ambitious. He'll rebuild. He'll find investors, make connections, leverage that $3 million into something bigger. That's who he is. He doesn't stay down." "That's possible, but I want a clause in the settlement, buried deep in language that looks like standard compensation language. Is something that triggers if the gallery's value increases significantly." Patricia set down her pen. "What kind of clause?" 40% ownership if the gallery sells or is valued at more than $5 million. Simone's voice was calm, measured. "Frame it as compensation for reputational damage and misuse of professional credentials. Make it contingent on major financial events, sale, acquisition, restructuring, significant outside investment." "Ms. Laurent, the gallery is currently worth maybe $2 million, and that's being generous. Most of that is debt. The chances of it reaching $5 million are excellent." Simone pulled out a folder. "Here's everything I documented. Every authentication I performed, every client relationship I built, every piece of institutional knowledge I brought to that gallery. Adrian doesn't have my eye. He doesn't have my expertise. But he has my work, my reputation, and $3 million in dirty money." She slid the folder across the desk. "He'll use all of it to make himself look legitimate. He'll find someone new, probably already has, someone with connections he can exploit. He'll network his way into bigger sales, better clients. And eventually, someone will see value in what he's built and offer him real money for it." Patricia opened the folder, scanning through authentication records, client lists, exhibition histories. Her expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. "This is comprehensive." "I'm thorough." Simone sat back. "I also have records of the forged authentication. Proof that he used my signature without permission on documentation for a sale tied to criminal networks. If this ever comes back to haunt me legally, see, I want protection, and I want compensation." "This clause might never trigger," Patricia said carefully. "If the gallery stays small, stays struggling, it won't." Simone's certainty was absolute. "Adrian Whitmore is many things, but he's not a quitter. He'll make that gallery worth something. It's just a matter of time." Patricia studied her for a long moment. "You're betting on his success. I'm betting on his character. He'll do whatever it takes to build his empire, even if it means stepping on people who trusted him. I just want to make sure that when he reaches the top, I'm there to collect what he owes me. And if his lawyer catches this clause, he won't." Simone's smile was thin and cold. "The gallery is worthless right now. Adrian wants this divorce over quickly so he can move on with his new life, his new girlfriend, his clean slate. His lawyer will scan the settlement, see standard compensation language, and file it without a second thought." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll draft it. But Ms. Laurent, I have to ask, is this about money or revenge?" "It's about justice." Simone's voice softened slightly. "He stole my work, my reputation, my name. He made me an accessory to crimes I didn't commit. When he profits from that, I deserve a share, not as his victim, but as his creditor." The settlement took 6 weeks to finalize. Adrian's lawyer, a harried man named Douglas Pierce, who handled 36 divorces a month, barely glanced at the clause buried in Section 7, subsection C. The language was dense, technical, to the kind of legalese that made eyes glaze over. In recognition of ongoing utilization of professional credentials and reputational capital developed by S. Laurent during marriage, contingent equity of 40% shall be activated upon any major capital event, including but not limited to sale, acquisition, restructuring, or outside investment exceeding $5 million in valuation. Pierce's eyes skimmed past it. The gallery was bleeding money. $2 million in debt, no clear path to profitability. The clause looked like standard face-saving language, the kind of thing that made a wronged spouse feel better without actually costing anything. He recommended Adrian sign. Adrian sat in his lawyer's office, relieved that Simone wasn't fighting harder, wasn't demanding more. He'd expected warfare. Instead, she'd been almost businesslike about the whole thing, taking her personal belongings, her authentication tools, her dignity. "She's being very reasonable," Pierce said. "Given the circumstances." Adrian signed his name with a hand that barely trembled anymore. He'd gotten good at signing things that would haunt him. Simone received the executed documents on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat in her new apartment, small, spare, nothing like the life she'd built with Adrian, and read through every page. When she reached Section 7, subsection C, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Patricia called an hour later. "It's done. You're officially divorced." "Thank you." "Ms. Laurent, I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone play the long game quite like this. But you understand there's no guarantee this will ever pay off?" "Yes," Simone said quietly, looking out at the city lights. "I understand." But she knew better. Somewhere out there, Adrian Whitmore was already rebuilding, already networking, already planning his comeback, already using everything she'd taught him to make himself look like someone worth investing in. And when he succeeded, because he would succeed, that was his nature, she'd be waiting, not for revenge, for what she was owed. 2 years after Simone Laurent signed her divorce papers, Nikolai Volkov sat in his Moscow office staring at a photograph of a Caravaggio that shouldn't exist. The painting had surfaced in a private collection in Geneva, listed in an estate sale with impeccable provenance. But Nikolai recognized it immediately. He'd seen it before, 3 years ago, as in a warehouse outside St. Petersburg, right before it disappeared from a Kozlov family transport. Nikolai didn't deal in art for beauty. He dealt in it for leverage, information, power over people who thought themselves untouchable. And the Kozlov Caravaggio was connected to networks that stretched from Russian arms dealers to European money launderers to American collectors who asked too few questions. He made a call. "Find out who authenticated this piece. I want every document, every signature, every transaction record." The answer came back in 48 hours. Simone Laurent, Master Authenticator, Whitmore Gallery, New York. Nikolai pulled up her credentials. Sorbonne-trained, apprenticed under Marcel Fontaine, one of the finest eyes in the business. Her authentication record was flawless. 11 years. With 347 pieces, not a single attribution ever successfully challenged, until the Caravaggio. He had his team pull the original files. The authentication bore her signature, her seal, her professional stamp. But when he compared it to her other work, Something felt wrong. The language was correct but impersonal. The analysis was thorough but lacked her characteristic detail about brushwork and technique. Nikolai had spent 30 years reading between lines, finding the truth in what people didn't say. This authentication felt hollow. He made another call. I want everything on Simone Laurent, where she worked, who she married, why she left Whitmore Gallery. Bank records, legal documents, everything. The file that arrived was a portrait of calculated betrayal, marriage to Adrian Whitmore, gallery owner, and divorce 3 years ago, finalized quickly, quietly. A settlement that gave her almost nothing except standard compensation clauses. Her departure from the art world entirely. She now worked in private consultation, rarely taking clients, keeping a low profile. But the timeline was what caught his attention. The Caravaggio sale, 3 years ago, 2 weeks after she left for a conference in Paris. The divorce filing, 3 weeks later. Someone who walked away from a marriage didn't usually do it over nothing. Especially not someone as careful, as brilliant, as Simone Laurent clearly was. Nikolai requested the complete Caravaggio transaction file. When his investigator delivered it, complete with emails pulled from Adrian Whitmore's compromised server, the picture became crystal clear. Adrian, drowning in debt. The consignor's offer. The late-night decision made while Simone was out of the country. The forged authentication using her digital signature, her credentials, her reputation. And then the sale to a buyer whose money trail led directly back to the same networks Nikolai had been tracking. Clever, Nikolai murmured, reading through Adrian's desperate emails. Not smart, but clever. He had his forensic accountant review the documents. The signature is forged. Look at the metadata. It was created from her template files, but she wasn't even in the country when these were generated. And the analysis itself, it's competent, but it's not her work. Too generic. She would have noted specific details about the brushwork that aren't mentioned here. Nikolai leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Adrian Whitmore had stolen his ex-wife's expertise, or forged her credentials and used her name to authenticate a painting tied to criminal networks. And when it all went wrong, when the authorities eventually traced the painting, Simone Laurent's name would be the one on the paperwork. She'd been made into an unwitting accessory to money laundering. The injustice of it appealed to something in Nikolai that he rarely acknowledged. He'd built his empire on understanding leverage, on knowing that power belonged to those who controlled information. But he'd also built it on a certain code. You didn't betray the people who trusted you. You didn't make someone else pay for your crimes. Adrian Whitmore had broken both rules. Nikolai had his team dig deeper into Simone's current life. What they found was a woman who'd disappeared from public view but hadn't stopped working. She consulted for museums under pseudonyms. She authenticated pieces privately, her reputation spreading through quiet channels to clients who valued discretion. She'd survived, but she'd lost everything she'd built. Get me the divorce settlement, Nikolai ordered. When he read through the document, he almost smiled. Buried in Section 7, subsection C, was a clause that would have made Machiavelli proud. 40% ownership if the gallery sold or was valued at more than $5 million. Simone Laurent had bet on her ex-husband's ambition. Nikolai pulled up the Whitmore Gallery's current financials. Adrian had recovered. The dirty money had been invested wisely. He'd married into a family with connections. The gallery was now valued at approximately $4 million, trending upward. Almost there, but not quite. But Nikolai made a decision. He called his acquisition specialist. I want to purchase the Whitmore Gallery. Offer $7 million. Make it attractive enough that he can't refuse. $7 million is high for... I'm not paying for the gallery, Nikolai said quietly. I'm paying to trigger a clause and to restore something that was stolen. The purchase negotiation took 3 weeks. Adrian Whitmore was reluctant at first, but $7 million for a gallery worth $4 was too good to refuse. especially when the buyer was willing to keep him on as director, maintain the Whitmore name, give him everything except majority control. Adrian signed the papers on a Friday. Nikolai had his lawyers verify the clause activation on Monday. Then he wrote a letter. Simone received the envelope on a Tuesday morning. Heavy paper. Expensive. Inside was a single card with an embossed address and a handwritten note. Ms. Laurent, my name is Nikolai Volkov. I recently acquired the Whitmore Gallery for $7 million. This triggers a clause in your divorce settlement granting you 40% ownership. I know what your ex-husband did. I know about the Caravaggio, the forged authentication, the betrayal. I have documentation of everything. Emails, financial records, forensic analysis proving the signature was falsified. You protected yourself legally 3 years ago. Now it's time to collect what you're owed. There's a charity gala this Saturday. Your ex-husband will be there with his new wife. I think it would be appropriate for you to attend as my guest and the gallery's new co-owner. It's time for the truth to come out. Consider this your invitation. N.V. But Simone read the letter 3 times in the quiet of her apartment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call to the number included at the bottom of the card. Nikolai answered on the first ring. Mr. Volkov, she said, I accept your invitation. I thought you might. His voice was smooth, confident, with the faint trace of an accent that suggested Moscow by way of everywhere. I've waited a long time to meet you, Ms. Laurent. Your work is extraordinary. You've seen my work? I've made it my business to understand it. The Caravaggio authentication that bears your name? I knew it wasn't yours the moment I read it. Too impersonal. You would have noted the specific way Caravaggio layered his shadows, the technique he used for fabric rendering. The forger, your ex-husband, didn't understand that genius has a signature that can't be faked. Simone felt something shift in her chest. You know about art. I know about value, Nikolai corrected gently. Real value, not the performance of it. And you, Ms. Laurent, are the most valuable thing Adrian Whitmore ever possessed. He just didn't realize it until it was too late. What do you want from this? Simone asked carefully. From me? Justice, Nikolai said simply. And perhaps, if you'll permit me, the chance to restore something that should never have been taken from you. Your reputation, your recognition, your name on the work you actually created. Simone was quiet for a long moment. Saturday, she said finally. I'll be there. Good. Nikolai's smile was audible. Wear something that makes a statement. This is going to be a night people remember. Nikolai didn't shake Simone's hand. He took it, turned it over, and examined her fingers like he was reading her entire history in the lines of her palm. These are the hands that authenticated the Kozlov Caravaggio, he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear and lean closer. Simone's expression remained perfectly composed. Among other things, I've spent 2 years tracking that piece through very interesting channels. Nikolai's smile sharpened. The provenance trail led me through Geneva, Moscow, 3 shell corporations, and eventually to a small gallery in New York. Your signature was the only legitimate part of a very illegitimate transaction. Across the ballroom, Adrian had gone rigid, champagne forgotten in his hand. Except it wasn't really your signature. Was it? Nikolai continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The metadata doesn't lie, neither does forensic analysis. You were in Paris when those documents were created. You've done your homework, Mr. Volkov. I make it a practice to understand what I'm investing in. He released her hand. Which is why I purchased the Whitmore Gallery last week. $7 million. More than enough to trigger a very interesting clause in your divorce settlement. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward. The couple standing nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. A city councilwoman turned, eyebrows raised. Adrian was already moving, abandoning Charlotte mid-conversation with a socialite whose family funded half the museums in the city. Mr. Volkov! Adrian's voice was too loud, too bright, and his hand extended in a gesture that looked like desperation, disguised as professional courtesy. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. What a pleasant surprise." Nikolai looked at the offered hand, like it was something distasteful, then deliberately turned back to Simone without taking it. "I came to meet your ex-wife," he said, his accent sharpening each word into a blade. "I make it a practice to know my business partners." Adrian's hand dropped. "I'm sorry?" "Don't be." Nikolai's smile was cold and precise. "This is a common problem in the art world. People mistake presentation for substance. They put their name on work they didn't create and hope no one notices who actually did the creating." The nearby conversations had stopped now. People were turning, sensing blood in the water. "Miss, Laurent owns 40% of my newest acquisition," Nikolai continued, his voice carrying to the growing audience. "As of tomorrow, she'll be taking an active role in the gallery's authentication division, with proper credit this time." Charlotte appeared at Adrian's elbow, her confusion painted across her face in real time. "Baby, what's going on? Who is this woman?" "Nobody," Adrian said automatically, then caught himself. "I mean, Charlotte, this is Simone, my ex-wife. This is just business talk, sweetheart." "Business?" Simone spoke for the first time since Adrian's arrival, her voice perfectly level. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" The word landed like a gunshot. The small crowd around them grew larger. Phones came out, discreetly angled to capture whatever was about to happen. "Simone, please." Adrian's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Can we not do this here?" "Do what?" Her eyes met his, and there was something devastating in her calm. "Acknowledge reality? You forged my signature on authentication documents for a painting tied to international money laundering. My name, my credentials, my reputation attached to your crimes. That's not... You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly." Simone stepped closer, and Adrian actually moved back. 3 years ago, you needed money. You sold a painting we both knew was dangerous. You used my professional seal without my permission, because the buyer wouldn't trust your authentication alone. You made me an accessory to money laundering to save your gallery." The ballroom had gone quiet now. The orchestra still playing, but conversations dying like dominoes falling. "That clause," Adrian said desperately, turning to Nikolai. "It's not enforceable. We'll fight this. My lawyers have already reviewed it." Nikolai's interruption was surgical. 5 different firms, actually. I'm thorough. The clause is ironclad. Your own lawyer signed off on it because the gallery was worthless then." He paused. "Much like your integrity." Charlotte's face had gone pale. "Adrian, what is he talking about? What clause? What painting?" "Nothing, it's everything," Simone corrected gently. She looked at Charlotte with something that might have been sympathy. 3 years ago, your husband forged my authentication credentials to sell a Caravaggio connected to Russian arms dealers. When I found out, I divorced him. But I made sure the settlement included a provision. If the gallery ever became valuable, I'd own 40% of it. She turned back to Adrian. "You built your recovery on dirty money and my stolen reputation. I just waited for you to make it worth something before I collected." A flash went off. Then another. The society reporters who'd come to photograph charitable donations had found a much better story. "Ms. Lauren," a woman's voice called out, Regina Walsh, art critic for the Times. "Are you saying Adrian Whitmore committed fraud?" "I'm saying he forged my signature on legal documents," Simone replied. "Mr. Volkov has the forensic evidence if you'd like to verify." "This is insane," Adrian said, but his voice cracked. You can't do this here in front of everyone." "Why not?" Nikolai asked. And there was genuine curiosity in his tone. "You built your reputation in public. Seems appropriate to correct the record the same way." Charlotte pulled at Adrian's sleeve, her voice rising. Baby, I don't understand. What is happening? Adrian didn't answer. He was staring at Simone like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Not as the woman he'd betrayed, but as the architect of his unraveling. "When did you know?" he asked, his voice barely audible beneath the whispers spreading through the ballroom. "That I'd succeed enough to trigger the clause?" "The day I signed the papers," Simone said quietly. "You're ambitious, Adrian. I've always known that. I just finally understood that your ambition was bigger than your integrity." She glanced at Nikolai, who gave a slight nod. "Mister, see, Volkov has been very thorough in his documentation. He has emails showing your correspondence with the consigners, financial records tracing the money, forensic analysis proving the signature was forged. And I'm prepared to make all of it public," Nikolai added, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom. "Unless Mr. Whitmore agrees to the new terms. Ms. Laurent receives her 40% ownership, full credit for her work, and her name on every piece of authentication moving forward." He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "You can keep your title, Adrian, but you'll share the truth now. Or I'll make sure every art publication in the world knows exactly how you built your gallery." The music had stopped. Every eye in the ballroom was on them. And then Nikolai did something that made the entire room hold its breath. Nikolai cupped Simone's face in his hands, tilted her chin up gently, and kissed her. Not aggressive, not possessive, but with a reverence that spoke of something deeper than business, something that had been building through investigative reports and authentication records, and the growing respect of understanding someone's genius from a distance. The kiss was brief, careful, but unmistakable in its meaning. When he pulled back, you could have heard a pin drop in the gilded ballroom. Camera phones were everywhere now, no longer discreet. This was the story of the season, unfolding in real time. "That," Nikolai said quietly, just to Simone but loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, was 3 years overdue. Simone's eyes widened slightly. This hadn't been part of the plan, but she didn't step back, didn't pull away. Something in her expression shifted, softened, like a door opening to possibilities she hadn't let herself consider. Adrian found his voice, strangled and desperate. "This is insane. You can't. This is my gallery, my life." "No," Simone said, and the word cut through his protests like a blade. She stepped away from Nikolai and walked to the center of the ballroom, every eye following her movement. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a circle around her like she was the sun, and they were planets pulled into orbit. "What's insane," she continued, her voice carrying in the sudden silence, "is thinking you could build an empire on someone else's expertise and never pay for it." She turned slowly, addressing not just Adrian, but the entire room. The art collectors, the society reporters, the museum directors and gallery owners who'd watched Adrian Whitmore's meteoric rise without questioning its foundation. 3 years ago, I was the lead authenticator at Whitmore Gallery. I built its reputation. Every major acquisition, every prestigious client, every piece that made that gallery worth trusting, I validated it. My eye, my expertise, my name. Her gaze found Adrian, who stood frozen with Charlotte clinging to his arm. "And when my ex-husband needed money, when the gallery was drowning in debt, he didn't come to me for help. He waited until I was out of the country, forged my signature on authentication documents, and sold a painting we both knew was connected to criminal networks." The crowd rippled with whispers, but Regina Walsh was typing furiously on her phone. "My name authenticated a Caravaggio used to launder money for arms dealers," Simone continued. "If authorities had traced that painting, when they trace it, my credentials would be the ones under investigation. My career would be destroyed. All because Adrian needed $3 million and thought my reputation was a price worth paying." "Simone, please," Adrian's voice broke. "It wasn't like that. The gallery was failing. I was desperate. You thought I'd never find out," she finished. "Or that if I did, I'd forgive you. Because that's what I always did, wasn't it? Forgave your shortcuts, your credit-taking, your slow erasure of my contributions. Every investor meeting where you presented my work as your insight. Every press interview where I was your talented wife instead of your expert partner." Charlotte was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "I don't understand. Adrian, tell her she's lying." "She's not lying," Nikolai said, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "I have years of documentation in my possession." He didn't elaborate, didn't list the evidence again. The folder's existence was enough. Adrian's face had gone white. "You can't. I'll fight this. My lawyers—" "Have already told you the settlement clause is legal," Nikolai interrupted. "I spoke with Douglas Pierce yesterday. Lovely man. Very apologetic about missing it 3 years ago. He confirmed that Ms. Laurent's 40% ownership is binding and enforceable." "This isn't about the ownership," Adrian said desperately, turning to Simone. "We can work this out. You were brilliant, everyone knows that. We can be partners again, real partners. I'll give you credit, put your name on everything." "No." The word was soft but absolute. Simone walked toward him, and the crowd held its breath. "I don't want to work with you, Adrian. I don't want your promises or your belated credit. I want what's mine, the equity I earned, the recognition you stole, and the truth." She stopped inches from him. 3 years ago, you told me that investors don't bet on partnerships. They bet on one face, one story. You were right about that. You just chose the wrong face." "When did you know?" Adrian asked, his voice hollow. "That you'd get it back?" "The day I signed the divorce papers." Simone's smile was genuine and terrible. "I documented everything, protected myself legally. Yeah, and waited for someone smart enough to see the truth. I just played a longer game than you did." She turned back to Nikolai. "Mr. Volkov has offered me full partnership in the gallery. My name on every authentication. My expertise properly credited. Control over the authentication division that I built. And if I refuse?" Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. "Then tomorrow morning," Nikolai said pleasantly, "every major art publication receives a comprehensive dossier. Complete documentation of fraud, forgery, and your knowing participation in money laundering schemes." He paused. "Your choice. Partner with the woman whose talent made you successful, or watch your empire burn when everyone learns it was built on stolen credentials?" Charlotte pulled away from Adrian, understanding finally breaking through her confusion. "You did this? You actually did this to her?" "Charlotte, baby, please! Don't!" She backed away, her voice rising. "Don't baby me. You lied to her. You used her. She looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the ruins of the life she thought she was building. "Oh, God! Everyone is watching. Everyone knows." She ran for the exit, heels clicking on marble, leaving Adrian standing alone in the center of the ballroom. Simone watched her go with something that might have been pity. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said, addressing the crowd again. "I came because Mr. Volkov sent me an invitation that said it was time to collect what I was owed. I didn't know what he'd planned. But now that the truth is out..." She looked at Adrian one last time. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to correct the record. That expertise, that eye for authentication, that ability to see what others miss, it was always mine. And from now on, everyone will know it." The ballroom erupted, reporters shouting questions, guests whispering, recording, sharing, the story already spreading through social media like wildfire. Adrian stood at the center of it all, watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time, and Simone Laurent, who'd spent 3 years in the shadows, finally stepped back into the light. Simone and Nikolai walked through the ballroom like they were the only 2 people who mattered. Behind them, the gala had dissolved into beautiful chaos. Reporters shouting questions, guests clustering in gossiping groups, phones glowing with the story already spreading across social media. Charlotte had disappeared, so leaving behind only the echo of her heels on marble and the scent of expensive perfume turned sour with tears. Adrian stood frozen at the center of it all, a man watching his empire crack open in real time. Someone approached him, a board member probably, or a concerned investor. But Simone didn't turn to see. That chapter was closed. The cool night air hit her face as they stepped outside, and she breathed it in like freedom. "You didn't have to kiss me," she said, once they were alone on the steps. The gala's noise muffled behind thick glass doors. Nikolai stopped, turned to face her. "Yes, I did." His accent thickened slightly, the way it did when he meant something. "I've spent 2 years learning about you, Simone, reading your authentication reports like poetry, understanding how you see what others miss. You have a gift that transcends expertise. It's almost like you can see through time, see the artist's hand moving across the canvas." He stepped closer. "And when I learned what he did to you, how he stole that gift and put his name on your genius, I knew I had to find a way to restore it. The kiss." He smiled slightly, self-deprecating in a way that was unexpectedly charming. "That was personal. I've been half in love with your mind for 2 years. Tonight seemed like the right time to be honest about it." Simone laughed, and the sound was bright and free, nothing like the controlled fury she'd carried for 3 years. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Can't it be both?" "It can." She looked back at the gala one last time. Through the windows, she could see Adrian surrounded by people, or his face a mask of barely controlled panic. The life he'd built on her foundation was trembling, and everyone could see the cracks. She felt nothing but a distant satisfaction. "What happens now?" she asked, turning back to Nikolai. "Now?" He walked to the waiting car, opened the door for her with old-world courtesy. "Now you go back to doing what you do best. Authenticating art, solving mysteries in brushstrokes, changing how the world sees beauty. Only this time, everyone knows your name." Simone slid into the car, and the leather was soft and expensive beneath her. Through the window, she could see the gala lights, the glittering crowd, the world she'd walked away from 3 years ago. And then she looked forward, smiled. It felt like victory. The next morning, Simone walked into the Whitmore Gallery as its 40% owner. The contracts had been signed at 9 a.m. in a conference room that smelled like coffee and new beginnings. Adrian had been there, his lawyer beside him, his signature shaking slightly on every page. He'd kept his title, Director of Acquisitions, but the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Nikolai owned 51%, Simone owned 40%, Adrian owned 9%. The gallery he'd built on stolen expertise no longer belonged to him. "Your office is ready," the assistant said, a young woman named Maya, who'd been hired after Simone left. "Mr. Volkov had it prepared last week." The office was beautiful. Large windows overlooking the city, proper lighting for examining art, shelves for her reference materials, and on the desk, a brass nameplate that made something tight in her chest finally loosen. Simone Laurent, Chief Authentication Officer. She ran her fingers over the letters, the same way she'd traced the Caravaggio all those years ago, reading the story beneath the surface. "Ms. Laurent?" Maya appeared in the doorway. "Your first authentication request is here, a potential Vermeer. The client specifically requested you." "Tell them I'll be right there." Simone put on her examination gloves, the soft cotton familiar against her skin. These were the hands Nikolai had recognized, the hands that could read centuries in brushstrokes, the hands that had built this gallery's reputation even when her name wasn't on the door. Now it would be, on every authentication, every acquisition. Every piece of press, her expertise, her credit, her truth. She walked into the examination room where the potential Vermeer waited under carefully controlled lighting. The client stood nearby, anxious, hopeful. "Ms. Laurent," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you for taking this on. I've heard you're the best." "I am," she said simply, because it was true, and she was done pretending otherwise. She approached the painting, her trained eye already cataloging details, the quality of light, the precision of perspective, the subtle color gradations that separated genuine from forgery. Her hands hovered over the surface, reading the story the artist had left behind. This was what she'd been born to do. Not to build someone else's empire, but to understand beauty in its purest form, to see truth where others saw only surface. And now, finally, she could do it on her own terms. But across the city, in a restaurant where power players met over expensive lunches, Nikolai sat reviewing acquisition proposals. His phone buzzed with a text from Simone. "The Vermeer is real. 1665, definitely Delft period. Client is thrilled. Thank you for this." He smiled and typed back, "That's all you. I just gave you back what should have been yours all along." A pause. Then, "Dinner tonight? I owe you a proper thank you. You owe me nothing, but I'll accept the dinner anyway." He set down his phone, satisfied. Justice was rarely this elegant, this complete, but sometimes if you were patient and strategic and willing to invest in the right outcome, you could correct the world's errors. She'd made a strategic wager 3 years ago, and tonight she'd collected everything she was owed. Nikolai had simply been the catalyst. And now, watching her reclaim her place in the art world, watching her name finally appear where it belonged, he felt something he rarely allowed himself. Hope. Not just for justice, for what might come after. At the Whitmore Gallery, Simone finished her authentication report and signed her name with a flourish. Her real signature, her real credentials, her real expertise finally acknowledged. She looked out the window at the city spreading below her, at the world that had tried to erase her and failed. And she smiled. Because the story wasn't about revenge. It was about a woman who knew her worth, played the long game, and won everything back, not through destruction, but through patience, strategy, and the unshakable certainty that genius, real genius, could never truly be stolen, only delayed. And now, finally, it was time.